Hello, friends. Today, let's talk about a field with a lot of miraculous operations climate change. It's 2025, and it's been a full decade since the famous Paris Agreement was signed globally. Soon, leaders from various countries will gather again in the Amazon, Brazil, for the COP30 summit. So the question is, how has our emission reduction report card been over the past decade? The UN's 2025 emissions gap report has just been released, and to translate its conclusion for you, it's an absolute disaster. The core data in the report indicates that, at the current rate, the Earth will warm by 2.8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, even if all countries fulfill their I promise to reduce emissions. Commitments, it will still warm by 2.3 to 2.5 degrees Celsius, but our goal is 1.5 degrees Celsius. What's even more embarrassing is that 2025 was supposed to be the year for countries to submit new homework and more ambitious commitments. The result? The UN says these new commitments have barely driven substantial progress. Global greenhouse gas emissions once again hit a new historical high in 2023. Why is this happening? Why has the promised emission reduction turned into a collective apathy? Today, we're going to thoroughly dissect a term which is also the unspoken rule behind all of this: greenwashing. The term greenwashing sounds professional, but it's actually very simple. Let me give you an analogy. You bought an expensive gym membership, a full set of top-tier sports equipment, then took a bunch of selfies in front of the gym mirror, posted them on social media with the caption, "Self-discipline gives me freedom, fat loss, new life." All your friends liked your post, and your persona as a self-disciplined expert was firmly established. But what's the truth? You left right after taking the photos and grabbed some street food on your way home. Is this gym selfie action? It's a marketing tool. Its purpose isn't to actually lose fat, but to make you look like you're losing fat. It's about reputation management. And today's climate issue is trapped in this collective selfie conundrum. Let's first look at the first act, the selfie of politics, when 1.5 degrees Celsius became politically correct. You probably often hear in the news, we must keep to 1.5 degrees Celsius. In the past, this was science. But the 2025 UN report saw a critical shift in its wording. It admitted that temporarily overshooting the 1.5 degree threshold is now unavoidable. UN Secretary General Guterres said this would happen by the early 2030s at the latest. Oh, doesn't this mean we're definitely going to fail the final exam? But here's the paradox. Guterres, on the one hand, says overshooting is unavoidable. Yet on the other hand, he insists that the 1.5 degree target is still within reach and remains our North Star. Are you confused? Isn't this contradictory? This is the first layer of greenwashing, the alienation of politics. 1.5 degrees Celsius is no longer a scientifically achievable goal. It has become a political anchor. In plain language, leaders must verbally pretend that 1.5 degrees Celsius is still alive. Because if they publicly admit it's over, it can't be saved, then the framework of the Paris Agreement would completely collapse, and countries wouldn't even have the motivation to take selfies. They would immediately switch to collective street food mode. 1.5 degrees Celsius has become the North Star we must pretend to chase, even though physical reality has long since diverged. Next, let's look at the second act, the miraculous operations of nations, when greenwashing becomes national policy. If the UN is still maintaining decency, then the greenwashing operations of various countries are simply a performance art extravaganza artwork number one. Norway's ethical surrender. Norway, an honor student in global climate and ethics, holds the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, worth 2.1 trillion US dollars. Their fund has ethical guidelines and absolutely does not invest in unethical companies. But the money for this fund comes from selling oil. However, in November 2025, the Norwegian parliament voted to suspend all new ethical divestments. Why did they suddenly stop pretending? The direct reason: the fund divested from Caterpillar due to ethical reasons. Geopolitical reasons: the US State Department, a major financier, immediately publicly condemned Norway, calling their actions very disturbing. Norway's opposition party directly said they were afraid of Trump's reaction. Financial reasons. The Minister of Finance himself admitted that, according to current ethical guidelines, The fund's 16% stake in 7 major tech giants like Nvidia, Microsoft, and Amazon could face forced divestment if they become involved in more. So, Norway's green ethics is just brand packaging. When it conflicts with capital and alliances, the Norwegian government unhesitatingly sold out its ethics. Artwork number 2, Brazil's internal conflict. Brazilian President Lula, a global climate leader and host of the COP30 summit, his flagship project is the Forever Tropical Rainforest Fund, aiming to raise 1,250 billion US dollars to protect the Amazon. However, just weeks before the COP30 summit, Lula's government approved the state-owned Petrobras to begin new oil drilling near the mouth of the Amazon River. This 5-month drilling period will completely overlap with the summit. Lula publicly stated that oil revenue would help finance Brazil's climate transition. This is the new logic of greenwashing. I must increase pollution today so I can afford to clean it up tomorrow. Artwork number 3, the 6-to-1 funding scam. This is the most blatant greenwashing. At the COP summit, wealthy countries were fiercely debating the $40 billion per year for adaptation funding. Developing countries need $310 billion to $365 billion US dollars annually to adapt to climate change, for example, by building flood defenses. But in 2023, international public funding dropped to $26 billion. The shortfall is 12 to 14 times. Meanwhile, from 2010 to 2022, wealthy countries subsidized their domestic fossil fuels by 2.7 trillion US dollars. This amount is 6 times their pledged international climate finance of 437 billion US dollars. This is not lack of money, but deliberate political prioritization. They perform struggling for billions in public while secretly approving trillions in subsidies. Having discussed greenwashing at the national level, let's now look at the third act, the illusion of corporations, from buying indulgences to strategic silence. Nations are greenwashing, and corporations are not idle either. Phase 1, the carnival of ghost credits. In the past, corporate greenwashing relied on one term, carbon neutrality. Shell, Gucci, and Disney all claimed to be carbon neutral. The prop supporting this claim was the voluntary carbon market. But in 2023, The Guardian and other organizations conducted a joint investigation that exposed the truth about this market. Verra, the world's largest certification body, had over 90% of its certified rainforest carbon credits as ghost credits, meaning they were worthless and did not reduce any carbon emissions. When the prop was revealed to be fake, how did the actors react? Verra, as the certifier, aggressively defended itself, calling the investigation full of lies, while quietly shifting responsibility to fraudulent project developers. Shell, as a buyer, was vague, stating it was disappointed with the issues found by Verra and took no responsibility. Gucci, also a buyer, offered the most candid Gucci defense. Its CEO once stated, "The best way to achieve zero emissions is to shut down the company. Offsetting is better than doing nothing." The voluntary carbon market was never a climate tool from the beginning. It was a marketing tool. Its function is to allow companies to continue growing and emitting while buying cheap indulgences to legitimately claim to be green. Phase 2, green stealth. The term carbon neutrality has now been exposed and has a bad reputation. So, what do companies do? They have evolved, and the new strategy is called green stealth. Companies no longer publicly announce exaggerated commitments, but instead remain silent about their climate goals. The number of times S&P 500 companies mentioned climate in their earnings calls decreased by 76% in 3 years. The World Economic Forum and PwC packaged this silence as quiet progress. They say companies are making progress out of the spotlight. Quiet progress also conceals quiet regression. Companies like PepsiCo are quietly weakening their climate goals. This is more advanced than greenwashing. Old greenwashing was false transparency, where I at least published data that you could verify. New green stealth is strategic ambiguity. It creates an accountability black hole where you can't tell if it's quiet progress or quiet regression. Phase 3, green shifting. There's an even more advanced trick. Let's look at Microsoft. Microsoft's original carbon negative goal is still in place. But now, their sustainability report focuses on 3 other goals: water positive, zero waste, protecting ecosystems. What's wrong with this? These goals themselves are good. The problem is, this is strategic delusion. Water and waste are local indicators. Carbon is a global indicator and the only one that is decisive for global warming. In one watershed, while providing services for their massive energy-consuming AI data centers and oil giants like ExxonMobil, which have a huge global carbon impact. This is green shifting, using a greenwashing waterfall tactic, loudly promoting success in secondary indicators such as water and waste to divert public attention from their failure in the only critical indicator, which is carbon. Finally, let's talk about the 4th act, the ultimate irony of the system. Friends, how absurd has this system become? So absurd that the climate disaster itself has become a new business opportunity. The consequence of greenwashing, global warming, the melting of Arctic sea ice. After the ice melts, a new northern sea route has opened up. This route is 40% shorter than the traditional Suez Canal, saving fuel, time, and money. Russia calls it the Golden Waterway and expects it to generate $160 billion in tax revenue by 2035. The world's largest shipping companies, MSC and Maersk, publicly refuse to use this route, citing environmental concerns. Don't think MSC and Maersk are saints. This is just a brand decision. Their customers are in the West, and they dare not bear the public relations disaster of profiting from Arctic melting. And this reveals the ultimate dilemma, the failure caused by wealthy countries and corporations, namely global warming, has now itself become an asset, namely a new shipping route, driving a new round of geopolitical struggle. Let's go back to the beginning. The UN report found a huge emissions gap, but through today's analysis, we will find that at the national level, this gap is not a mistake, but a deliberate choice. Wealthy countries prioritize geopolitics, like Norway, domestic economies, like Brazil, and huge subsidies, like the G7, over climate action. At the corporate level, companies have established a parallel fantasy system. First, they used ghost credits for false transparency, and now they use green stealth for strategic ambiguity. At the systemic level, this system rewards abnormal behavior, turning disaster into a profit opportunity. So, when leaders at COP30 launch something like a financing roadmap from Baku to Belém, aiming to mobilize $1.3 trillion, you should know that it is doomed to fail. Because the entities they are appealing to are precisely those who have just been exposed for sacrificing ethics for capital, like Norway, and prioritizing fossil fuel subsidies 6 to 36 times over, like the G7. Greenwashing is no longer an anomalous loophole in the system. It has become the main operating system of this system. It is this greenwashing mechanism that allows climate negotiations and oil drilling, net zero commitments, and ghost credits to coexist so absurdly in the same world. This is a necessary illusion to keep this failing system running.